Perplexity didn't do anything. Reddit is suing them as part of this movement to try and make scraping illegal. They are complaining about Perplexity scraping Google's scraping of Reddit. Oh yeah, we're way beyond fair use at this point. We're at things where the Copyright Act outright says is public. But no, they're hitting Perplexity in there in order to make this an AI case, when Perplexity didn't do anything at all. The sheer number of steps is remarkable. They sued Perplexity by playing the Kevin Bacon game. Somehow robbed Reddit of the opportunity to collect revenues from the content created and owned by Reddit's users. Reddit is not acting to protect its users. Reddit is clearing a path to exploit them as the gatekeeper and the toll collector for user content that, as Reddit concedes, it does not even own. They want that moolah, and how much of that do you think they're going to share with their users, huh? All sorts of nefarious things going on, all in the name of fighting AI. Well, hello and happy new year to everyone. I hope you had great holidays. And yes, I will be getting to the AMA. I know we're already a few days into the month, but I'll get there. Don't worry. But we had 2 documents drop here in Reddit v. Perplexity. And there are also a couple of other defendants, one of whom we'll get to. But for those of you who haven't heard me talk about this before, the basic idea is that Perplexity AI is an AI-based search engine. They're not a generative AI, although they can leverage generative AIs like ChatGPT or Claude in the background. They can make API calls to them, but their AI is just about being a search engine. And Reddit is suing them as part of this movement to try and make scraping illegal, which has been a part of the open internet since the beginning, and these AI cases are their latest excuse to try and do that. There are a few problems. The first being that Reddit doesn't own the content on its website. The users who post the content do. And there's nothing in the terms of service that gives Reddit the authority to act on their behalf if there's any kind of copyright complaint or anything. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that none of this is about scraping Reddit. Google already scraped Reddit. And when Google did that, they made a search engine that shows you the search results and those snippets that summarize what the link is. So they are complaining about Perplexity scraping Google's scraping of Reddit. But it's even worse than that, because Perplexity didn't scrape anything. That's where these other defendants come in. So Reddit got information from a couple of other companies who scraped freely, publicly available information on the internet that was scraped from Reddit that belongs to Reddit's users. So yeah, now we have the motions to dismiss from Reddit and from one of the other defendants, and I don't know how they pronounce their name. I'm going to call it SerpApi, but I don't know if that's supposed to be SerpApi. The API isn't capitalized, it's camel case. Search is Search Engine Result Page, and API is Application Programming Interface. So it's all an acronym, but I don't know how they're pronouncing it. I'm going to go with SerpApi until I learn different. So we'll look at them later, but let's start with Reddit, because these both came down on the same day. And instead of going through the entire document, you can tell a lot just from the table of contents. So there are some cases where we'll be reading the body of the filing, but a lot of times we got the table of contents here that tells us what we need to know, such as how Perplexity's answer engine draws on publicly available information to provide comprehensive summaries with source citations. Reddit alleges that the other co-defendants engaged in large-scale automated collection of Google search results. Reddit does not allege that Perplexity scraped any data. And so for that reason, they're saying that Reddit fails to state a claim. Reddit fails to allege that Perplexity engaged in any sort of circumvention. They didn't do anything. They also say Reddit has not alleged a technological measure that effectively controls access. And this is important. We've talked about this several times, the DMCA and its distinction between access controls and copy controls. So we will read a little bit from that one. And then there are their state law claims. They're preempted by the Copyright Act. And so if you go down on the state law, and they're talking about unjust enrichment, they're talking about duplicative, they're talking about wrongful content, they're talking about benefit received, things like that. If you're suing on a state level for anything like that, but it's indistinguishable from a copyright case, they're saying all of this happened because you stole our copyrighted content, you don't get to sue at the state level for that. That's copyright jurisdiction. That makes it federal. So that's what they mean by duplicative. And also Reddit alleges no benefit received by Perplexity through either wrongful conduct or at Reddit's expense. And Reddit fails to allege misappropriation, bad faith, or special damages. So that's basically their case. Let's see what they say over in the introduction. Reddit's complaint is that the other defendants, not Perplexity, improperly collected public Google search result pages. So they're saying, hey, we didn't even do anything wrong. We didn't even do what they're saying. And the ones that did, it's public. They're just getting public information. Materials that any user can freely access without restriction, and then provided those materials to Perplexity. The sheer number of steps from Reddit's users creating posts to Perplexity's allegedly receiving information related to them is remarkable. Reddit's users author posts to which they, not Reddit, allegedly own a copyright. Then, Reddit receives a non-exclusive license to the posts from the users and publishes those posts on its free public website. Then, Google indexes them and publishes search engine result pages that excerpt their content on its free public website. Other defendants supposedly evade a Google access control, not even a Reddit access control, called SearchGuard, and scrape those search result pages. And finally, Perplexity allegedly receives the publicly available search result pages from one of the other defendants, SerpApi. Even taking this alleged daisy chain framework at face value, Reddit fails to state a Section 1201 claim against Perplexity on two separate grounds, either of which is sufficient to doom its claim. First, Perplexity sits downstream of any alleged circumvention, and therefore cannot be liable under Section 1201A1A. There is no secondary liability under Section 1201. It applies only to those who actually circumvented an access control themselves, not to others who subsequently received accessed materials. The complaint fails to allege that Perplexity itself engaged in any circumvention, and that defect alone is fatal. And second, it fails to allege that any of the defendants circumvented a technological measure that effectively controls access. And they're talking about Google SearchGuard. By Reddit's own account, SearchGuard allegedly aims to prevent one particular type of search results access, large-scale automated copying, while leaving the actual search results freely and publicly accessible through an ordinary Google query. That means two separate links in the attenuated chain of liability from Reddit to Perplexity are legally defective. The link between Google and the other defendants, because SearchGuard is not a technological measure that effectively controls access, and the link between SerpApi and Perplexity, because Perplexity itself is not alleged to have circumvented anything. As for its state law claims, courts have consistently dismissed unjust enrichment, unfair competition, and civil conspiracy claims as preempted by the Copyright Act when those claims are not qualitatively different from a claim under the Act. Reddit's state law claims seek to protect the same rights as those under the Copyright Act and are therefore preempted. So, rather than asserting that Perplexity breached any technological access control operated by Reddit to protect any content that Reddit owns, Reddit's alleged theory is instead as follows. First, individual Reddit users write posts on Reddit's platform and license them to Reddit. Second, Reddit makes those posts publicly available for free on the internet. Third, Google then indexes snippets of those Reddit posts in its SERPs, which are also publicly available for free. Fourth, one or more of the other co-defendants allegedly collects and copies via automated processes those public Google SERPs, some of which contain snippets of Reddit user posts. Fifth, SerpApi then purportedly provides the Google SERPs it collected to Perplexity, which then allegedly uses those SERPs in its own search engine by summarizing them and providing citations that link back to the original Reddit posts. Perplexity appears only at the far end of this multi-step chain and is never alleged to have participated in or even observed any of the content in the prior links. So basically, they sued Perplexity by playing the Kevin Bacon game. You're within 6 degrees of separation, therefore you're liable. Alright, so we talked about looking on page 10, which is page 16 of the PDF for those following along. Reddit has not alleged a technological measure that effectively controls access. SearchGuard targets only one method of using Google SERPs and otherwise leaves the search results openly accessible on its public search engine. Moreover, to the extent Reddit seeks to rely on its and/or Google's terms of use, those are not technological measures because they're not technological at all. They're just words on paper. They say pretty please, that's all they are. A Section 1201 qualifying access control does not naturally extend to a technological measure that, like SearchGuard, restricts one form of access but leaves another route wide open. So while courts have held that password protection, DVD encryption measures, and activation and validation keys qualify as technological measures, they have dismissed Section 1201 claims where the alleged technological measures left the underlying protected work openly accessible. Yeah, anyone can just open a browser and get it. That's not an access control. You're not controlling access, and you also can't get around it by claiming some kind of contractual violation. Contractual terms at most regulate permission to access or use content. They do not transform alleged noncompliance into circumvention of a technological barrier. Courts are explicit that violating contractual restrictions on access to or distribution of encrypted transmissions is not the type of circumvention that Congress intended to combat. Reddit thus cannot assert an anti-circumvention claim based on any alleged violation of terms of use by the other co-defendants that ostensibly forbid the scraping of data, since bypassing permission is distinct from bypassing digital walls under the DMCA. Because Reddit has not alleged that Perplexity circumvented a technological measure that effectively controls access, its DMCA claim must be dismissed. And there was everything else in the table of contents that we saw. For the foregoing reasons, the court should dismiss Reddit's claims against Perplexity. So basically, Perplexity didn't do anything. So let's look at someone who did. Let's look at SerpApi, because they're the ones they say actually scraped the data. And again, we can get most of this from the table of contents. Reddit lacks statutory standing to bring DMCA claims. Reddit is neither the owner nor the exclusive licensee of any copyrights at issue. They all belong to the users. Reddit does not control the alleged technological measure at issue. That's Google's. And Reddit lacks Article 3 standing. Reddit fails to allege any concrete injury. We are going to go into and look at that one. And Reddit's DMCA claims also lack a close historical or common law analog. Reddit failed to plead the necessary elements to establish that Google's TPMs are effective access controls. Reddit admits that Google's TPMs do not limit public human access to its SERPs. Reddit fails to allege that Google has authorization from the alleged copyright owners. And notice they're not suing Google. The Reddit content at issue is not works protected under the Copyright Act because they're just snippets, they're fair use. And Reddit's claims also fail because they lack an infringement nexus. We haven't covered that term before, so we'll get into that on page 17 and look at that one. We'll also look at the next one, where Reddit's DMCA Section 1201 claim fails because Reddit does not allege that Google's TPMs are copying controls. So before, we were looking at them as access controls. Now we're going to look at them as copy controls. And remember, even if it is a copy control, fair use applies. Unlike with access controls, which they try to make everything an access control because there's no fair use defense there. Reddit's unfair competition claim fails for the same reasons we talked about before. You can't make a state claim when on the face of it what you're talking about is a copyright violation. It's preempted by the Copyright Act, and Reddit and SerpApi are not competitors. SerpApi doesn't compete with Reddit. The unjust enrichment claim fails because it's preempted by the Copyright Act, it's duplicative and derivative of its other claims, and Reddit fails to allege a specific or direct benefit conferred upon SerpApi. And then there's the civil conspiracy claim. And this is that they all work together to do it, which is why they can sue them all together. But again, that's preempted by the Copyright Act. And the second one underneath that, and we're going to look at this, even if Reddit's claim is not preempted, the claim fails because the underlying DMCA claims fail. So again, just a few more things to cover, but let's see what they say in their preliminary statement. By filing this lawsuit, Reddit purports to vindicate its users' rights and to ensure that the Reddit community is protected from abuse. But this action is motivated by money, not altruism. Reddit seeks to establish itself as the gatekeeper and the toll collector for user content that, as Reddit concedes, it does not even own. Now we're starting to see the motivations here. This lawsuit is an ill-conceived means to that end. Indeed, SerpApi has little to do with Reddit or its users' content. SerpApi enables users to scrape and normalize publicly accessible web search outputs into consistent structured formats, enabling automated analysis, monitoring, and interoperability across software systems. That data is used by a variety of organizations, including journalists, technology innovators, and financial institutions. As Reddit concedes, SerpApi does not access content from Reddit's website. Instead, Reddit's allegations concern snippets of text found on Google's search engine result pages, and the alleged TPMs at issue are Google's measures, which Reddit does not control in any way. Reddit, nonetheless, tries to recast this dispute as one about Reddit users' content, asserting that SerpApi's activities somehow abused Reddit users' trust. But in the same breath, Reddit reveals its true purpose, complaining that SerpApi's use of Google's SERPs somehow robbed Reddit of the opportunity to license and collect revenues from the content created and owned by Reddit's users. Thus, Reddit seeks to consolidate its control over its users' content so that it will be in a better position to tax that content. Reddit is not acting to protect its users. Reddit is clearing a path to exploit them. It's not their data, it's the user's data, but Reddit's trying to get that moolah. As a threshold matter, Reddit lacks standing. No court has ever extended DMCA standing to a plaintiff like Reddit. It is neither the owner nor the exclusive licensee of any copyrighted issue. Reddit users have not given it any contractual enforcement right with respect to their user content. Reddit does not even control the TPMs that were allegedly circumvented. Thus, Reddit lacks statutory standing. Reddit also lacks Article 3 standing because it does not allege any concrete injury. Its claims of lost commercial opportunities and reputational harm are speculative and lack particularity. And even if Reddit did have standing, each of its claims falls on its face. And most of these are for reasons we've already seen. But let's talk about the concrete injury bit on page 9, which is page 17 of the PDF. Given that Reddit has no copyright rights in the content at issue, Reddit instead vaguely alleges injury in the form of lost profits and business opportunities, reputational harm, and loss of user trust. Second, Reddit alleges that SerpApi damaged Reddit's reputation and business relationships by depriving it of the ability to control access to its users' data. Third, Reddit speculates loss of potential licensing fees or other commercial opportunities from existing and new licensing agreements with other AI companies. That kind of sounds like they want to profit from AI companies using your data that you posted to Reddit, even though it's your data, not theirs. Finally, Reddit alleges that SerpApi's conduct has forced Reddit and its partners to invest significant resources to improve their technical security systems, surveillance, and anti-scraping efforts. Each of these alleged injuries is insufficient. Alright, let's go over to page 25 and talk about this infringement nexus. So ordinarily, infringement is done by the first person who does it, the person that's actually infringing. Anyone who gets any knock-on effects of that is not an infringer, unless there's this nexus. A plaintiff must allege that defendant Circumvention infringed a protected work or facilitated infringement, an infringement nexus. So if you work to facilitate it, you're part of that nexus, even if you didn't actually do any infringing yourself. That's how they're trying to get Perplexity in there. That's how they're trying to make this an AI case. But here, Reddit makes no claims of copyright infringement, nor can it, as SerpApi collects publicly accessible content that is not protected by the Copyright Act. Consistent with the Federal Circuit's approach, and the Federal Circuit, by the way, is the one that does contract law. So if you've got a contract with a federal agency and you need to sue, Federal Circuit is where you do it. There's a separate circuit for that. Not like if you're in the Second Circuit and that's where you would go for an appeal. If it's a contract dispute, you go up to the Federal Circuit. Other circuit courts and at least one court in the Second Circuit have agreed that an infringement nexus is required to state a claim. They don't have one, so it's failure to state a claim. The absence of an infringement nexus requirement would undermine the balanced protections of the Copyright Act, creating a regime in which the owners of a work protected by both copyright and a technological measure that effectively controls access to that work per Section 1201A would possess unlimited rights to hold circumventors liable under Section 1201A merely for accessing that work, even if that access enabled only rights that the Copyright Act grants to the public. It would effectively assume Congress intended to let copyright owners slam the door on public access, even when that access causes no harm. Oh yeah, we're way beyond fair use at this point. We're at things where the Copyright Act outright says is public. This proposition is not only irrational on its face, but also hard to reconcile with the DMCA's statutory prescription that nothing in this section shall affect rights, remedies, limitations, or defenses to copyright infringement, including fair use, under this title. Thus, with no allegation supporting an infringement nexus, Reddit's DMCA claims must be dismissed. And also, Reddit does not allege that Google's TPMs are copying controls. And again, the DMCA makes a distinction between access controls, where fair use does not apply, and copying controls where it does. And the access controls are in 1201A, and copying controls are in 1201B. The Google TPMs at issue allegedly control whether a bot can access Google search pages. In other words, they are alleged to be access controls. Reddit does not allege that Google's TPMs prevent copying, although Reddit attempts to use sections 1201A and B interchangeably to ensure that it plausibly states a claim under some provision of the DMCA. The legislative history of the DMCA confirms that such attempts are futile. Because Reddit fails to allege that Google's TPMs are copying controls, Reddit's section 1201B claim fails. Alright, let's see, we're also going to talk about the underlying DMCA claims. Even if Reddit's claim is not preempted, the claim fails because the underlying DMCA claims fail. Even if there were no copyright preemption, civil conspiracy is not an independent tort in the state of New York in any event. This is because the actionable wrong in a civil conspiracy lies in the commission of a tortious act, but never upon the agreement to commit the prohibited act standing alone. Therefore, Reddit must successfully plead an underlying intentional tort forming the basis for the conspiracy. Here, Reddit's DMCA claims serve as the tortious conduct underlying its claim for civil conspiracy. Because the underlying DMCA claims fail, so too does Reddit's claim for civil conspiracy. If you're not conspiring to do anything wrong, then the conspiring itself isn't wrong. For the foregoing reasons, the court should grant SerpApi's motion to dismiss. Again, the whole thing, they want it all kicked out. And you see what they're doing? They're not just suing SerpApi, and they're not suing SerpApi along with Google. Google scraping is fine, SerpApi scraping of Google scraping is not? Of content they don't even own? If they thought that, they could just sue SerpApi. But no, they're hitting Perplexity in there in order to make this an AI case, when Perplexity didn't do anything at all. They just made an AI that is not a generative AI, that is therefore incapable of creating any infringing content, that indeed gives you summaries of Reddit posts and links back to the posts. Posts that again are owned by the users, not Reddit. But Reddit apparently is trying to profit from it. They want that moolah, and how much of that do you think they're going to share with their users, huh? Come on. That's the thing, we've got all sorts of nefarious things going on. We've got the attack against scraping. We've got trying to profit from copyrighted content that they do not own. All sorts of nefarious things going on, all in the name of fighting AI. How many times do we see it? You need to stop falling for it. None of these AI cases have any validity, as we see over and over and over again. They're just ways to try and do what activists have been trying to stop for 25 years. This is the culmination of all that. And if this goes the wrong way, then we're all going to be in trouble, even those of us who don't use AI. That is the important thing you have to remember. Thank you so very much for watching. Comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne. Please hit like, subscribe, and the bell, and of course, donate.pagosity.tv keeps me doing all of this, whether with one-time donations or regular support. Get these videos early and ad-free. Participate in the AMA. The AMAs for January are up. I'm about to sit down and do the questions for December and answer those, so keep an eye out for those. Thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.